Hey guys, and welcome back to the Heal with Kat podcast. My name is Kat and I am your host, and I am so excited to welcome you back to another episode on the channel here. If you are watching on Spotify or YouTube, hi. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, hello as well. And if you are new here, welcome to the Heal with Kat podcast. I'm not sure how you found me, but I am so grateful that you are here. I've got tons of episodes for you to dive into on so many different topics around self-development, growth, and especially our relationships with our families. So if some things in that sound good for you, then my podcast may be really supportive for you. If you are not new here, welcome back. I'm grateful to have you here. So this week's episode is all about addiction from the lens of family constellation therapy. If you're new here and you're not sure what family constellation therapy is, it's a therapy modality that I use to help people heal the ways that they are carrying their ancestral trauma and the trauma of their family members on their back and calling it their own, and all the ways that it's keeping you stuck. The way that I facilitate family constellation therapy, or I'll abbreviate it in the episode today as FCT, is that I use part energy work, part channeling and intuition, and part good old talk therapy and psychotherapy and being trauma informed. For me, when I was first getting into this work, I was obsessed with the spiritual side of it, but I had no clue about trauma. I had no clue about all the things that I know now, even a small part of what I know now. And so I knew that in discovering being trauma informed and what that means, I knew that it was not only going to benefit me, but now it benefits my clients. And so I truly feel so grateful to do this work. And if you're not sure if you believe in an energy field, if you're not sure that you believe in being able to speak to the energy of your ancestors, that's totally fine. I don't need you to believe in it to be here. I'm just hopeful that some of the information that I share with you today resonates with you, is supportive and helpful for you. I heard this in a book written by Dr. Brian Weiss once, where he does past life regressions. And he says, it doesn't matter to me if people believe if it's real or not. I know that it helps. And that's how I feel about FCT. It doesn't matter to me if people don't believe that it's real in energy or anything else that we do. I just know that it helps. And I see that every single day. So, like I said, today's episode is about addiction from the lens of family constellation therapy. I first want to acknowledge, before we get into the episode, that addiction is complicated. It's going to be a very sensitive topic. I think addiction touches every single person in some capacity, or that it touches every single family in some capacity. So in acknowledging the complication and the complexity of addiction, I just want you to know that the information that I share in today's episode is not the end all be all of addiction. If you read In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Dr. Gabor Mate, you will truly see how complex addiction is. And I will link that book in the show notes if that interests you. But it really takes a more trauma-informed approach and a very humanitarian approach to addiction, which I think, instead of trying to diagnose people, Dr. Gabor Mate in this book really tries to empathize and understand people with addiction. If you have not heard of Dr. Gabor Mate before, just go on YouTube, type in his name. You'll see his name in the show notes as I link next to the book. He is my unofficial mentor in so many ways, and he is an incredible human being with so much information and an incredible life story. So if trauma information or anything about today's episode really interests you, definitely go check out his work. Today's episode is not in an effort to oversimplify addiction, but rather to spread awareness around some of the fundamentals of the development of addiction and the possible root causes from our family systems. I'm going to be talking about addiction from all kinds of lenses, from the self, if we struggle with it, to our family members and our nuclear family, and then we'll talk about it from the extended family perspective and your ancestors. So we're going to go into many different parts of addiction. It largely relies on my learnings from Family Constellation Therapy, or FCT, and from my mentor, of course. So please take that all into consideration. Some things today will land, some may not. Take what resonates and leave the rest, all right? So like I mentioned, Dr. Gabor Mate, my unofficial trauma mentor, through his teachings and his books, is a renowned physician and addiction expert. And he defines addiction as a response to pain, trauma, and disconnection. The disconnection part is really important to pay attention to. The trauma is actually what disconnects us. Our response to the trauma is what disconnects us and that pain. And he emphasizes that addiction is not solely about substances, but it encompasses a wide range of behaviors and experiences. So people will come to me in FCT sessions and say, well, there's addiction here or addiction here with like drugs and alcohol. And I'm like, great, any other addiction? Is there like anything more minor or minute that like maybe an addictive behavior or an addictive thought about something? You can see a lot of OCD and addiction show up at the same time as well, because there's a constant need to self-soothe. And according to Dr. Mate, addiction is a coping mechanism that we use to alleviate emotional pain, to fill inner voids, and numb unbearable feelings. And so he views addiction as a complex dynamic of biological, psychological, and social factors rooted in early childhood experiences, our attachment patterns, which I will get into in this episode, and societal influences. Dr. Gabor Mate says that the behaviors that show up with addiction serve as the underlying function as substance abuse. So it's providing temporary relief from emotional distress or a sense of emptiness, and self-soothing helps us to escape from painful memories or feelings. So these are some, but not all, the ways that addiction can show up in our lives. There's drugs, prescription pills, alcohol, sex, pornography, work, staying busy. It's a big one. Exercise, food and eating, obsessing over our bodies, shopping and spending money, relationships and situationships, gambling, self-harm and self-sabotage, and compulsive behaviors. And that's where some of that OCD tendency pops up. I'm going to talk a little bit today as well about the connection between addiction and OCD and its connection to war trauma. So that's where we're going to get into some of the ancestral stuff, so you can start seeing and understanding how things trickle down in the family system. So here, I'm going to speak a little bit about how we view addiction in FCT, and I'm going to split the podcast today into two parts to understand addiction. And the first part, I'll touch on the nuclear family impact, meaning mom, dad, and possibly any siblings. And then I'll expand into the extended family, ancestral patterns and connections, and deeper FCT fundamentals, including touching on epigenetics, which is a big topic to touch on, but it is incredibly important to note and to speak about if we're going to talk about something like ancestral addiction in the family system. To start off with the nuclear family and just the family in general, I really have to mention that addiction is a huge dynamic, and it shows up in pretty much every single person's family system in some way. The addiction in a family system causes a separation, and the most profound separation that we see in a family system through addiction is between a parent and a child. Addiction can usually be tracked beyond the grandparents' generation. So like I said, we're looking for things ancestrally that are going far back into the family system that triggered this need for self-soothing that just hasn't been healed or acknowledged or looked at. And in FCT, we're going to do our best in a session to try to pinpoint the root cause of that addiction. But because it can be tracked beyond our grandparents' generation, and not everybody knows that much about their family system, we have to lean on being in an energy field in the session to show us where to go. And again, if you're new here, in Family Constellation Therapy, I talked about the trauma information part, but the energetic part is that I open an energy field. And if you've ever received Reiki before, you know that you can feel it moving through you, but you can't see it. It's very, very, very similar to the way that I open an energetic field in Family Constellation Therapy. I assign pieces of paper to family members. So paper number 1 could be your mom, paper number 2 could be your dad, paper number 3 could be you. It kind of just depends on what we're healing and what we're looking at. They could also be chakras. They could also be like a million other things. I put words in there before. Last week's episode 2 weeks ago, I did an episode with my friend Ian, and we talked about his family constellation with him and his paternal lineage. And we put the word anger into the field because what I want to do is understand how everyone on the papers is going to react to the word anger. If you have no clue what I'm talking about, I have an episode called What is Family Constellation Therapy? It's like far back. I think it's episode like 20. You can listen to that, and that's like a deep dive into what I do. But coming back coming back out from that hole. I lean heavily on this energy field and my intuition to show us. But you can also use my ancestral subconscious meditation if you want to do some work on your own to call on your ancestors for support around this. I'm actually now offering this meditation for free as a gift for signing up for my newsletter. So my brand is going through a huge reworking right now. So my emails are kind of at a pause, my newsletter. But I'm building out some things with my coach, and this was one of them. So if you go to my website, it's linked below in the show notes. And as soon as you get on my website, it says unlock ancestral wisdom. Put in your email and your first name, and you'll get the meditation instantly in your inbox. And that's a really great way of you connecting with your ancestors on your own without, somebody else being the messenger, for you to have that really profound experience. And you can go into that meditation and basically ask your ancestors to show you what is stuck and have no expectations about it. I've done this meditation in group settings before, and people will say, I want to connect with my mom. I want to connect with my grandma. And a random uncle will show up, or an uncle or a cousin or a baby that passed really early. Or sometimes nobody's there, but it's just the energy of them. So it's really interesting to experience. If you're going to set a meditation for the intention, set it on something that you want to learn more about and see who wants to show up to help you. In my humble opinion, addiction always comes back to our relationships with our mothers. That doesn't mean that our fathers don't have a role in addiction, in the theme of addiction in our families or in that dynamic, but I really see most every time I deal with addiction in the field, in an FCT, it usually has a huge weight on the mother. The reason for that is because as children, mothers are our first home, and we need nurturing, love, fulfillment, care, attention, validation through our mothers to feel safe and secure. And if we were separated from our mothers for any reason, small or big, NICU or divorce, like whatever it is, in the first 3 years of our lives, we are going to feel that disconnect with our mothers, and there's going to be a break in that relationship, even if your mother did not intend it. I also find this with mothers who were cold or not nurturing or very hands-off or distant, or maybe struggled with mental illness of any kind, where there was a non-connective dynamic that didn't feel like love. I will also see addiction. So really at if we're looking at the forest and not the tree with addiction when it comes to our mothers, where was there a break in the bond with your mother, a break in the connection with your mother, that then you didn't get that nurturing love and support consistently that you needed to feel safe, and then you started looking for it outside of yourself? When I was 27, I got divorced. And right before I officially signed the divorce papers, I went to this place called Onsite in Cumberland Furnace, Tennessee. And I'll never forget meeting one of the therapists there. It was like a 5-day long retreat, no phone, no nothing, in the middle of the countryside in Tennessee. I met one of the therapists named Carlos, and he was teaching the morning lecture on the second day. And he was talking about this, about our need, our primal need as children to feel connected to our mothers emotionally, physically, and I believe, I'm going to take it a step further, is spiritually. And he talked about this term called stonewalling, and he linked it to something else called reaching out. Stonewalling is really when a mother completely shuts down in a conversation or in a emotional interaction with their child and refuses to communicate with them. Now, stonewalling can be with anyone. I'm just going to use the example of mother, since that really is probably going to hit home for a lot of you listening who struggled with addiction or know someone with addiction. And this can happen mostly when a child is pre-verbal. They're looking to connect with their mother through expression of some kind, and the child is not given that emotional validation or connection back. So the example that Carlos showed us on YouTube is this video of a child eating in their high chair, and the child is smiling and laughing and playing and, flinging the food and just in their joy, because babies know nothing else. They're so present. They're full of love. They are unconditional love and joy. They haven't been tainted by the world just yet, right? And so they're just having this happy experience. And then the mother is just, her face, if you can see me on Spotify or YouTube, is just no emotion, blank. If you're listening on Apple, think of it like somebody who is just monotone, mute, no expression whatsoever. So a child will experience that stonewalling from the mother and will completely disconnect and learn to disassociate from the mother because the connection's not coming from her anymore. When I think about it now, when I watched it on YouTube, I sobbed watching it. My heart just broke thinking about the fact that myself included and many other children go through this so often. Sometimes the mother can't help it that she's going through postpartum depression, or she's a single mother, or she's exhausted, or whatever it is. And the mother just doesn't have anything left in her to respond back to the child. Like, we really do not know as children, as babies, what our mothers are going through, but we know that we can feel there's a disconnect. And that disconnect is how we start to subconsciously believe that this is the way that things are, that this is how life is. We go against our true unconditional love and joyful nature. And the way that we belong to our mother is now through disconnect, betraying ourselves, disassociation. So all of these things are survival mechanisms we use as children to try to stay in connection with our parents, because we literally rely on them for everything. And it is so subconscious, we don't even realize it. Reaching out is the opposite. So reaching out is when a child reaches for the mom or the parent to be picked up, and the parent reaches back for the child. And so you create a flow between you and the child, or you and your parent. However, a lack of reaching out can really cause some serious issues of connection, bonding, and security between a child and a mother or father. And I want to say this as well, like, we cannot sit here and just blame our parents for everything. Right now, we are exercising our empathy. We are exercising our ability to look at different perspectives and get curious on potential circumstances or experiences that we may have had. You know, there are cases where I will work with a client and their mother or father was in a deep active addiction and did turn away from the child completely. And that is still living in the adult in my client today, that fear of connection, feeling like they never feel safe, feeling like they don't belong anywhere. Like, that is still very, very real. However, there are unintentional circumstances like postpartum depression, like a father who had to go back to work too quickly, like a mother who felt like she had to carry everything on her back. Like, all of these things can contribute to that as well. And it's common for me in an FCT session to see a client is either merged or enmeshed with a parent because they're constantly reaching out for their parent and their parent is facing away from them every single time. When the child feels like the parent is not reaching back for them emotionally, physically, mentally, or even spiritually, the client as a child will shut down. And that's how we start learning what fight, flight, freeze, or fawn is for survival. I talked a little bit about that a couple minutes ago, but that's survival energy. The child will start developing unhealthy attachment towards their parents as they search for their love. And this creates a need for self-soothing in the child. So if the child's not getting it with their parents, they're either going to turn it back on themselves or they're going to look for it outside of the parents. If you were stonewalled as a child or you didn't receive reaching out from a parent, it could show up for you in your adult life as you stop expecting your needs to be met from everyone and you create a deep hyper independence. It could also show up as women who don't take care of themselves or reach out for help. So like if they're having mental health issues, physical health issues, they don't reach out to a therapist. They won't reach out for a doctor visit. They won't invest in themselves. And the reason for that is because they learned that women turn away from them. So they have to turn away from themselves or turn away from their mothers. And that theme of turning away is because their mothers turned away from them for any reason. So they will literally reject themselves because they felt rejected by their mothers. If you were stonewalled as a child and you didn't feel like you got connection from your parents, you could also feel that you're never safe for anything that you do and anywhere that you go. Or you could use verbiage like I feel stuck or trapped, or I don't feel safe. There are other dynamics with our mothers that can play into addiction showing up in a family system. And one of those is actually adoption. So adoption is a fascinating concept. I talked about this on episode 46, where I did a Q&A. Somebody had asked me a question about adoption. In all my episodes, I have chapters and timestamps. So if you go to YouTube or Spotify or Apple, you will see the timestamp for when I talk about adoption. But adoption can create a false sense of safety because there was no bonding with the birth mother. This can also happen with like surrogacy, because the child, even though a child in surrogacy is identified biologically with a outside mother or father, the baby has spent 9 or 10 months creating a relationship with this birth mother of some kind. And so it's important to just continue to keep that relationship open and honest with the child and allow them to have that connection with the birth mother, because that birth mother brought them into the world and they share a special connection. And it's unfortunate that people and women cannot carry their own children. And it's not a bad or a good thing. It's just, it is what it is. Sometimes those are the cards that we're dealt with and the things that we have to navigate. But just keeping an open bond with that birth mother is really important for the child. Also linked to our parents and addiction is the wound of abandonment. And this can show up in so many different ways. It can be through abuse from our parents. It can be the addiction that we saw with our parents, divorce. It can be through like birth trauma when we were separated from our parents at the time of our birth for any reason, like being put in the NICU or just lack of skin to skin contact, like right after the birth. And we didn't get that bonding that we needed. It could even be that we feel our parents don't love us because we don't perform for them to get their love. And that could have started with sports at a young age. Specifically with going into the NICU, I want to touch on this because it's really common. Babies that are in the NICU right after birth and don't get that skin to skin connection with their mothers. Again, we're not looking at right or wrong or good and bad. Sometimes these are just the cards that were dealt. But babies in there in the NICU by themselves and separated from their mother with a lot of strangers can be confusing for the baby. And the separation is confusing for the baby. It's not conscious, it's a felt sense in the body. So the brain may not remember, but the body does. And even though as an adult, you're no longer in the NICU, that break in that bond, that separation from your mother, it caused you to look for self-soothing where you did not get it. There's a common mentality around abandonment that I find is a really interesting theme. It's when somebody thinks that when I get the partner, it'll be enough. When I get the job or the money, it will be enough. Or when I get healthy, it will be enough. And we focus so much on that we never actually experience true fulfillment whenever we get the things that we want, because we're so focused on filling that hole. And that comes back to worthiness. So if you struggle with enoughness or being good enough or finding fulfillment in things, look at your relationship with your mother. Was there synonymous energy in the relationship, or were you constantly searching for her? Was there a break in the bond? This is why the root cause of addiction, I always look for the mother first, because our mother is our portal to experiencing so many things in life. If we want to feel connected to our purpose, look at your mother. Look at your relationship to the mother. And it's hard because many of us had wonderful mothers who did their best and fell short, and we still may be feeling this way. Go into that. Go into that deep place where you can just acknowledge for the inner child within you that what you got wasn't enough, and that's okay. And maybe you didn't even know that it wasn't enough, but maybe on this journey you find that you needed more hugs, or you needed emotional validation, or you needed someone to sit with you in your feelings and not punish you and send you to your room to be alone. Most of the time, our disconnect with our mothers is emotional, and it's their lack of capacity for our emotions that then reflects to us our worthiness, because then we feel if mother can't sit with me and help me with my feelings, I must not be good enough. I must be a bad girl. Think about it. When you're a kid, you don't think I'm not good enough. And you don't think I'm not pretty enough or I'm not smart enough. You just think I'm a bad boy. I'm a bad girl. That's how kids are labeled. Now, when you become an adult, that bad boy or bad girl mentality, it does show up as unworthiness. It's these more eloquent ways to say that. But at the end of the day, what we feel is that disconnect tells us we're bad when we're not bad. We're good. We're just learning how to be a human. And that's why I love Dr. Becky Kennedy so much. I am obsessed with her and her work. My boyfriend and I are trying to get through her book. I think between my boyfriend and I, we literally read like 100 books a year or more. We always have our hands in a different book. But if you listen to the Dr. Becky Kennedy and Huberman Lab podcast episode, it'll blow your mind. It was so good. And she says that she's trying to shift the parenting narrative that children are good and they're just having a hard time. Or children are good and they're learning how to be human. And as parents, we have to believe in their innate goodness so that they don't grow up thinking that they're bad and they don't have any like worthiness or like enoughness issues, so that they can really start to understand that like I'm a good person and I'm also having a hard time. And that self-sabotage and that insecurity doesn't stem from a deep, shameful identity part. It's more just like learning how to navigate our difficult points of life. There's another part to this that is connected to our nervous systems and the body around feeling safe to have what we desire. So again, I'm going to say this until the day I freaking die. Nervous system work and somatic therapy will always go hand in hand with any part of our healing journey, because self-sabotage, I talked about this so many times already, with abandonment, with self-soothing, with searching for our mothers. You have to be able to feel safe in your body to receive what you want. Otherwise, your body will send messages to your brain and tell you, reject this, don't take it, it's not safe, and talk you out of it because you've never had it before. I remember when I first started dating my boyfriend, I, for a long time, didn't believe that this kind of love was real. I tried talking myself out of it in the very, very, very beginning. It's too good to be true. You know, how can you connect with someone this deeply? Maybe he's just going to like ghost me. And we were just friends before we started dating. And there were just so many things going through my head. And I remember my body would also just feel like uncomfortable or unsafe at certain moments when we were in deep connection. Like we'd sit at this fireplace because we met living in the same apartment complex in Del Mar, San Diego. And we would go sit at the fireplace with our dogs and we would drink wine, and he would get so vulnerable and deep with me, and he'd connect with me deeper than any man has ever tried to connect with me before. And I remember the feeling in my body was like I would start shaking and I would be like, oh, I'm just cold. But I wasn't. I was literally like trauma shaking because I was like, oh my God, is it safe to be this vulnerable with someone? Is he going to judge me? Is he going to criticize me? Like all of my fears came up. So I used to turn the fireplace on and I used to sit literally right next to it to calm me down. And I don't even think he knows that. But that's what I'm saying. In my body is like this, my soulmate, my life partner, like this person who was going to change my life in the most profound ways. My body was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Is this safe? Sending signals to my brain. Is this safe? Is this safe? And eventually I just leaned in, and it happened enough times, the connection with him, that he made it safe to be me and to have any feelings that I wanted. And now I feel like for the most part, I can have really any feelings or any thoughts and he'll never judge me. And we can just have like a dialogue about it, which is really beautiful. So there are good men out there. For everyone who thinks there aren't good men out there, I'm tired of seeing society be like, fuck men, I'm a feminist and I hate men. There are good men out there, and the men that are wounded, look at their mother relationships and their dads too, I guess. You can't really pinpoint, I guess. You can't really label anyone these days, but I always look at the mom first for everything. And that's the hard part, is that there is such an emphasis on the mother. It's such a powerful role that we hold as mothers. And I'm sure many women hearing that would be like, oh God, that's a responsibility I don't think I'm ready for. You know, who is ever ready to be a mother? Who's ever ready to get married? Who's ever ready for big, huge life changes? Nobody. There's so many emotional and physical and spiritual components to change. So I think if you feel called to be a mother, just know that you are fully capable of embracing that powerful role of bringing life into this world and bringing healing and love and nurturing into a child's life, which is life-changing for them, as we are discovering on this episode today. There is a huge link between parental roles, so the role of your parents in your lives, and attachment theory and addiction. So parents, attachment theory, addiction. If you've never heard of attachment theory before, I'm going to go through all the 4 main kinds of attachment that we experience that stem from our parents. And it's connected to a few different things, but I want to point out too that it's important to look at same-sex relationships with parents. So what I mean by that is, in psychotherapy and traditional therapy, the therapist will always encourage the client to look at the opposite parent. So for example, if you are a woman and you go into a therapist and you say, I'm having issues with dating, then the therapist in traditional psychotherapy is going to say, okay, let's look at your daddy issues. And there's a lot to that. There really is. I mean, there's a lot of proof in that pudding. But In FCT, we actually start looking at the same sex parent first to see if you're blocked or repeating a certain pattern. So if you come to me in an FCT session and you're like, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z, I'm pretty much going to look at your relationship with your mother first and foremost, and then dad will kind of come later down the road once we've worked through the layers of mother. So let's talk about the role of our mothers and fathers on our lives, because we've been talking a lot about it with like childhood development, but the actual role that our parent or our mother or our father holds in our lives plays a significant role in the things that we learn as we develop and move on in life. So the role of your mother is about giving you the feeling that you can be successful, to feel the zest or the joy of life, to feel worthy of abundance, to feel safe in love, to have a nurturing experience, and for you to also tap into your own female nurturing. The health of your immune system is always related to your relationship with your mother and your ability to trust life. So if you're someone that is unable to trust life, trust people, trust yourself, always look at your relationship with your mother. The role of the father helps us with having direction. Having a good relationship with your father can inspire purpose in you. It can help you with your expression of yourself and your boundaries, joy, and your service to others or yourself in life. And so the role of father and dad is always in deep support of the mother. If you're a new father and you're not sure how to support your child, support the mother. Support your wife, support your partner, so that she can feel safe and held enough that she can turn to her child and fully support the child to give the child the most secure attachment. And this is the hard part with fathers, is that most fathers don't feel connected to their kids until they're born. And even then, they struggle to develop a relationship with them because the child is fully focused on mother for survival. New dads always kind of feel like they get pushed to the side a little bit because it's like, well, the kid doesn't need me and my wife is so busy doing all of these things. They kind of feel like the odd one out. Absolutely not the case. The father is needed just as much as the mother, but the way that the father can show up is in deep support of the mother. So mom can have the energy, the time, and the space to then feed the child, give the child the secure attachment, and nurture the child so that when that child passes 3 years old, they not only have a good relationship with their mother, they have a good relationship with their father, and they've seen a healthy dynamic between the mother and the father where they realize that father supports, mother nurtures, and there's a whole dynamic family system involved. We start to question our relationship with ourselves when that dynamic is out of place, because as children, we think everything has to do with us. We're like mini narcissists, just like running around unintentionally. So we think that if mom and dad are fighting, it has something to do with us. We don't know how to depersonalize that. And so seeing a healthy relationship and seeing a tight-knit bond between father and mother always benefits the child in every single way. Our relationships with our parents as children, as teens, and as adults really affects our relationship with life. So when we feel fulfilled and nourished by our relationships with our parents, then we feel safe and supported to experience our life and go out into the world. I remember my mom used to tell me this growing up, and then I heard about it in a hypnosis that I was in. And I'll kind of tell you the brief story of it and tie it back to this thing that I think is a fundamental value that really all parents should get curious about for themselves and their parenting experience, because I'm not going to say there's a right or wrong way to do it. But my mom always said that she would help me to feel good about being who I am so that I could go into the world and spread my wings and fly. And if there was ever a reason that I needed to rest my wings and fall, that she would be there to catch me. And I never really fully understood that until college when I did fall and she was there to pick me back up. And same with my dad. My dad, same mentality. I'm really lucky in that way. But my mom always made it a point to say it like that. My dad just was more of an actions guy, a provider. If you need something, I'm here. If we needed something, we go to my dad. But my mom was really the one that always said it. And then I was in a subconscious hypnosis 2 years ago with a very good friend of mine. And I have a really deep relationship with the Virgin Mary, Mother Mary. I have statues of her all around the house. I work with her as one of my guides. Mother Mary is the protector of women. And so when I was healing my mother wound, I really needed to be close to her. And she gave me so many miracles and gifts that eventually I want to do a podcast episode on, but I'm still processing all of it. But in that subconscious hypnosis, I asked to talk to Mother Mary. And in that, my soul channeled a message from her that basically said, a good mother knows when to step in and support and help her child, and a good mother knows when to lean out and let the child learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. You guys, I was completely hypnotized when I had no conscious clue of what I was saying in that moment. It was like I was channeling. I went back and listened to it, and I realized it was pretty much the same thing that my mom was telling me growing up and the same thing that my dad was doing for me. And I realized that when I feel safe and supported by my parents, I feel like I can go out into my life and live a life that feels really beautiful for me, not because I need to do it for anyone other than me, not for them, right? So I share that because I think that that's a really important fundamental value that parents can take to help their kids feel safe in being who they are and experiencing life. And the whole goal of looking at the ancestral parts and the familial parts of our addictions, our blocks, our traumas, is to be able to move forward in our life with confidence, to take off the things that we're carrying for our families so that we can have better relationships with people, healthier bodies and healthier minds, more self-esteem, have careers that are successful, have successful relationships romantically with ourselves, with others, and with our parents. Like, we are supposed to receive safety and security from our parents. And so if there's something in that experience that you had with them that you didn't receive that, we need to look into why and how so that we can help you heal that and you can move forward, even if you're never going to get it from your family members. Because that's the hardest part, is realizing that you may never get what you need from your family and then not being able to ask them because of their lack of emotional capacity or understanding to fulfill those needs. And so how do you move forward? And that's where your work starts. That's where the work really begins. That's where the inner personal diving deep into who you are and your purpose and your pain and all of these things help you to understand who you are so that you can then go forward in life, feeling confident, having love, success, all the things. And speaking of security, if we're going to touch on addiction, we really do need to understand how it can develop from childhood in a deeper, more psychological way, meaning what happened in our childhood that went unhealed and unacknowledged, and how is it following us into adulthood and showing up as addiction. Attachment theory is something that I touched on in the very beginning of the episode, where Dr. Gabor Mate says that we can look to our attachment style to understand our addictions. And there's 4 main kinds of attachment that we experience that basically are rooted in our relationships with our parents and how our parents not only connected with us, but how they handled our conflict and feelings in our childhood. So the 4 main ones are anxious, avoidant, disorganized, and secure. Anxious attachment refers to a relational style that is characterized by a strong desire for closeness and intimacy, coupled with a heightened fear of rejection or abandonment. So I'm reading these verbatim in definition. You can tell I'm like reading these, but I really wanted to get a professionally diagnosed definition of each attachment style so that it could be very, very clear. And then I might use some examples. People with anxious attachment will usually look for reassurance and validation outside of themselves, usually from romantic partners, and may display clingy or needy behavior when feeling insecure in a relationship. So in anxious attachment, you're really just feeling that emptiness and that disconnect with you and your mother. And so you're looking for it in a romantic partner, and you may feel like you can't get close enough to your partner, that you literally could be like inside of their body, literally one with them, and that still wouldn't feel like enough. But that is what anxious attachment looks like. It's this deep need to be close to them. If you're anxious or avoidant or disorganized, please do not beat yourself up for this. This is just the way that we learn to survive. And just like you learned to survive in these ways, you can learn to thrive in other ways. Your brain is constantly molding. You can build new neural pathways at any time, and you are not stuck with this forever. Just want you to know that, okay? The second one is avoidant attachment, and this refers to a relational style characterized by a reluctance or a hesitation to rely on others for emotional support and closeness. People with avoidant attachment tend to prioritize independence and may have difficulty expressing their emotions or forming deep connections in relationships because growing up, connection didn't happen often or it wasn't safe. So you got really good at relying on yourself. Avoidance will often withdraw or create distance when feeling overwhelmed or vulnerable. This happens a lot with abuse, especially physical abuse. If you realized that if you got too close or if you provoked your parent in any way and there was a punishment for it, you may look to be more avoidant to avoid a situation or feelings that was harmful to you. It's not the end all be all, it's just one example. We really have to stay flexible and open-minded with the different ways that this can manifest for us. The third one is disorganized, and it's kind of a mix between avoidant and anxious. The way that it's described here in this book is disorganized attachment can be extremely chaotic to navigate because it refers to a relational style marked by conflicting behaviors and reactions in relationships, often stemming from inconsistent caregiving experiences in childhood. So it's a lot of push and pull behaviors. Individuals with disorganized attachment may display a mix of anxious and avoidant behaviors, struggling to establish coherent and consistent patterns of relating to others. So this can lead to difficulties in forming secure and stable relationships as adults. It can show up in conflict with a partner as I need you to connect with me, but I'm going to run away from you until you come and get me because it feels unsafe. And then maybe I'll blow up your phone and then I'll ghost you. It's like this push and pull, push and pull. And it's like your deep yearning for connection and then feeling deeply unsafe to have it. Whereas anxious people just cling and then avoidant people just flee. I struggled with disorganized attachment for most of my life. That's why I really relate to the anxious attachment. It's interesting because I was very, very disorganized when I was single, post-divorce, and dating. But in relationships, I show up much more anxious. It's interesting how it kind of like ebbs and flows. Even when I was with my ex-husband, I was very anxious. And then towards the end, I just became super avoidant. And then dating, I became disorganized. So I've kind of just gone through these different flows with it. And sometimes people can switch their attachment style. So I had like a COVID boyfriend. I think like a lot of us had that. I dated him for like 3 or 4 months. It was quick and fast and ended even more quickly. And he was very anxious, very attached. And because I was normally the more anxious, disorganized kind, dating someone like him was very confusing for me. And I watched, literally witnessed myself become the most avoidant person you've ever seen. It was actually kind of bizarre. I was like, wait a second. I don't want anything to do with this. This is so weird. Like it was just like avoiding my feelings, avoiding like what was really going on in the relationship, just avoiding that it was moving too quickly. And I ended up ending the relationship and then right back into disorganized attachment while dating. So it kind of just depends on the dynamic that you're in. The last one is secure attachment. And this is the healthiest attachment style that we are always working towards. But unfortunately, I don't believe that we ever are fully healed or fully secure. I think different scenarios and people in life will bring out a different side of us, as I mentioned. But secure attachment refers to a healthy relational style characterized by a strong sense of trust, comfort, and security in close relationships. So people who feel safe with other people. Don't know her sometimes. Individuals with secure attachment feel confident in seeking support from their parents when needed, and they can effectively communicate their needs and emotions without fear of rejection or abandonment. This secure base enables them to navigate conflicts and life challenges with resilience and stability. I mean, raise your hand if you've ever met a person like this. No one's raising their hands. I know that. No, there's probably some of you raising hands out there. That's a little bit of the cynic in me. Mostly the cynic in me is the inner child who's like, people have relationships like this. We're not labeling anyone as good or bad. Avoidant people get such a bad rap, you guys. Avoidant people are not bad people. Anxious people, they get a bad rap in some ways. They are not bad people. Disorganized people, not bad people. We are not labeling anyone good or bad. We're not playing the little manipulative childhood games of good and bad. Everyone here listening, you are a good person. I don't even have to know you are a good person. I don't. I believe in my heart, despite the mistakes you've made and the choices that you've made, you are still a good person. At some point in your childhood, you disconnected from your goodness and you chose to replay trauma. That's all that it is. So if you go back in time and you heal that trauma, you even go back into your ancestors and heal that trauma. Guess who's benefiting? You. And I will stand by that till the day I die. In an FCT session, whenever I sense that there may be trauma around 3 years old for someone in a session, I usually will look at the attachment theory. 3 years old intuitively usually comes up. So my intuition works really interestingly where I pick up on trauma patterns and numbers. I do mediumship and I do like all the other intuitive things, but the strongest one is usually ages and the pattern of things and being able to see the pattern from a different perspective. So common ages that I'll intuitively pick up on for people: birth, 3 years old, 5 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old, 13 years old. Those are like the major developmental stages of someone's young adult life and childhood life. So if I say to someone intuitively, what happened at 3 years old? I'm looking for the attachment theory. If I say I'm looking for some trauma around 10 years old, I'm looking at puberty. Interestingly, the thing with 3 years old, if that's coming up for anyone, is that's when separation anxiety shows up, is around 3 years old. So you could have separation anxiety from the minute you're born, but the effects of that won't show up until about 3 years old or a little bit older because it doesn't become conscious until then. So that felt sense of your body knowing that there's abandonment, it will not consciously show up until you start to learn how to develop words and sentences and have more conscious feelings. And that all happens around 3 years old. And 3 years old is a very clear sign of what happened in regards to attachment theory. So I look for any signs of trauma here, whether it's avoidant or anxious or disorganized attachment that you struggle with. If someone is struggling with addiction, it's important to understand what they are either running from, what they need more of, or what they are in the chaos energy of. Dr. Bert Hellinger, who started Family Constellation Therapy, or he rather modernized it from the Zulu tribes in Africa, he said that every family has a soul. Spirit and my guides show me that every family system has a vibration. That resonates more with me. Every family system shares a vibration of energy. If the family system is in a vibration of addiction and chaos, you're going to be born into that. And there's going to be some level of you that resonates with chaotic energy. Maybe you're someone that thrives in chaos. It's because what you were born into. So that's more of the spiritual side of it. So these are the things that we need to look at. So we've talked so much about the nuclear family, mom and dad, and their roles in addiction and how it shows up in the child or the client. Now I want to talk about how it becomes generational. So if I were to take all of the information that I just told you about the nuclear family and I applied it to each nuclear family going back in your generational system, this is how generational trauma occurs. Most of the time, the same things, the same themes, the same actions, behaviors, fears, you can literally just take it back into the family system and root it at something that happened in your lineage. We just have to be mindful of how we look at how it's being taken back into the family system. And just like war energy, addiction energy in a family system is really suffocating and complex. So we are passing on traumas through behaviors, patterns, beliefs, choices, and actions. And it's very unconscious intergenerationally. And many times our family members and their family members and their family members have created such a deep identity around that passed down trauma or fear or action or behavior that they forget that it's not even their pain that they're carrying, nor do they really see that it's available to be looked at in a totally different way. And actually, we can work towards healing it and getting better at navigating how it shows up in our lives. When I'm looking at intergenerational trauma of any kind, addiction, abuse, romantic partners, health, whatever it is, I always look at this word called belonging. I did a full podcast episode around belonging. It's episode number 42. It's all about belonging. Belonging has to do with our very deep need to stay in connection or close or in the circle of our family. And many times we will quote unquote belong to our families in ways that aren't in our highest and best good just because our need for belonging is so great. The way that this shows up with addiction is if we are in a family system where everyone is a functional alcoholic, heavy drinking is readily available and acceptable and is celebrated, if you are the person that decides to get sober, you will feel different from your family system and you will not feel like you belong. Similarly, if you get sober and you relapse, you may be trying to belong to your family member and the lineage of addicts in the family, and you can't maintain your sobriety because you are constantly looking to bond and belong with your family system. The thought of being sober threatens the unconscious connection we have with our families. So a lot of the times when people come to me in FCT sessions, they don't even realize they're doing it. And that's what I'm there to tell them. Hey, these are the ways that you're staying entangled in your family's trauma, and you may not even really know how. And it's showing up like this, this, and this. People are mind blown because they're like, oh my God, I didn't ever see it like that. Secrets are the hardest thing to navigate healing ancestral trauma, but it's not impossible. It just takes more time. And this is why sometimes the ability to ask our family questions about where we come from and the people that we come from can be so healing for us because it helps us understand ourselves. What's interesting about the intergenerational part about addiction is that clients who think that they're better than their mom or their dad, like I'm never going to be like my mom or my dad, they're struggling with an addiction and it'll come back around as judgment. And then the client will realize that they're doing the same thing in a different way and they're following the same pattern. And then there's shame. And then we have to address the shame in the family system. When we're talking about intergenerational stuff, we also have to touch on epigenetics, which I think is really, really important to touch on. I'm going to do a whole podcast episode just on epigenetics. Epigenetics is not only the genes that we're predisposed to, but it's also our genes that are affected by our environment. The positive news about epigenetics is that we're never stuck with the genes that we're given. We can constantly turn the light off and the light on with certain ones. So even if we're predisposed to obesity, if we lead a very healthy lifestyle, we may never turn the light switch on for obesity, right? So that's just like a very generic example. But if we're predisposed to addiction and we lead a lifestyle that is the opposite of addiction, that we're learning how to be secure in ourselves, we're healing our relationships with our parents and especially our mothers, we're looking into all this intergenerational trauma, and we're creating an environment around us with people, place, and things that feel supportive for a healthy, non-addictive lifestyle. You may be predisposed to addiction, but you'll never actually turn that light switch on. And I used to say to myself, well, my mom has depression and my grandpa has depression, and so I'm probably going to struggle with depression my entire life. And then I did the most intense 3 years of family constellation therapy around my entire family system. And truly, I've had moments that feel difficult and feel uncomfortable and I feel really down. I've never struggled with depression to the extent that I had before I found this work and the suicidal ideation that I used to struggle with as well. Truly, this work changed my life. The last thing I want to talk about within the realm of addiction is the subject of war trauma. I said this earlier in the episode. There's a connection between self-soothing, addiction, connection, and OCD and the impulsivity of it. Interestingly, when someone is in the energy field in a session, so when they're standing on the papers and they're in the energy field and you're standing on mom's paper and you're literally embodying mom's energy and then dad's energy to try to understand where things are stuck with them, there's a certain way that the client will set up the papers that shows me both addiction and war trauma, meaning the papers are set up the same way. This is how closely the energies of both addiction and war trauma can show up in our family system and in our lives. War trauma carries a very, very deep energy of chaos and confusion in a family system, and it's very suffocating. Addiction shows up similarly, but it also plays out in a different way. And it's not unheard of that our family members who were in any kind of war in the last 150 years struggled with addiction to escape the painful memories or cope with the tragedy that they witnessed. This is the effect of war energy and addiction energy in our nervous system. Chaos needs control. War is chaos. We're seeking control. Addiction is chaos. We're seeking control. They're very, very similar. War has a vibration, and whomever it touches is almost always swallowed by it. War is about control, manipulation, ending lives, deep chaos, and conflict. It is the exact opposite of peace. I've learned about this working on the war trauma in my family. If you know someone in your family who is in active duty in the war or saw active war while serving, even if they weren't in a prominent role of some kind, someone who was in the war and suffered at the hands of war, there's most likely addiction energy in your family. And if there is, there's a tie between the two. The addiction is happening because the body of the person who was in or around the war is still trying to self-soothe from the war energy and how suffocating it feels. So when someone is in addiction, it's common to hear them describe their experiences as like chasing a high. And it doesn't always mean that it will only show up with drugs or alcohol. It means that we're looking for fulfillment in something. We want to experience a hit of dopamine in the brain, and that hits our reward center. So naturally, if we don't get a lot of this dopamine growing up as a child and we don't have a healthy relationship with it, our addictions as adults will become an endless feed to the part of the brain that needs that fulfillment and that nurturing, like we spoke about, and it will never seem like enough. We're always kind of left wanting more because it's not actually fulfilling or nurturing. It's just temporary. What's really interesting is in the book Dopamine Nation by Dr. Anna Lemke, she explores addiction in modern society from the perspective of the brain, particularly in the context of the dopamine-driven reward system. And in the book, there are some fascinating insights. I strongly recommend this book to everyone, but she talks about the parent-child dynamics impact in addiction, and it really does coincide with some of the FCT fundamental teachings. She talks about early childhood influences and specifically in relation to the brain's reward center. She talks about how early experiences with our parents as children shape the development of that reward circuitry. So, positive reinforcement is good for a child feeling fulfilled. Nurturing and consistent care contribute to healthy neurodevelopment, she says. She says that neglect and trauma and inconsistent parenting, especially emotionally, can disrupt that brain reward center, and it increases their vulnerability to addiction later in life. So she's acknowledging all the things we just talked about. She also talks about the impact of modeling behavior, and this ties back into what we talked about in the lens of FCT around the role that each parent plays. But parents serve as a primary role model for children, and the parents' behaviors around substance use and coping mechanisms is basically a child's way of developing their attitude and behavior towards addictive substances or activities themselves. My favorite part of the whole book is she talks about effective parenting strategies. She's positively reinforcing the reader to be a healthy parent. And she says things like open communication, setting clear boundaries, and actively monitoring children's activities are all tools that help lower the risk of addiction by fostering healthy relationships, resilience, and internalized coping skills. This is also why I love Dr. Becky Kennedy, because she says that the fundamentals around parenting are boundaries, empathy, emotional safety, and recognizing that children are good. I think I'm missing one, but she really believes like your kids are good. They're just highly influenced by their environment. They may be picking up on things that's affecting their internal environment, and you as the parent are responsible for helping them navigate it. And I know that, this is really controversial to say. I don't believe in the crying out method. The crying out method was one of the worst things that we could have told our mothers and our fathers to do for us growing up. Children have no clue how to self-soothe themselves. They have no clue what they're doing. I think that it was a reached attempt in order to find something new to help crying babies. Read The Nurture Revolution if you resonate with the crying out method and you're in a place around motherhood in your life where you feel like you may want to do things differently. Or if you really want to understand your childhood, if you're a millennial, if you want to understand some of the things that I've talked about today, go read that book. It's so, 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 so good. It'll help you understand from a nurture and also a scientific perspective on why crying out is actually not good for children. If we were asked to cry it out for too often or too long as children, there is going to be that deep need for mom, that deep need for support or connection. And just the crying out alone breaks my heart for babies because I don't know, it's just my personal opinion. I just think the crying out method is actually, the crying out method was developed by a male doctor. Did you know that? I did not know that until recently. The crying out method was developed by a male doctor who was trying to come up with his own theory of how to help babies calm down. And it's not to say that like men don't know how to help soothe babies. There are many men out there who are wonderful support systems in helping calm down babies. But at the end of the day, why are we looking to men to help us understand our nurturing and connection between our children? I just don't. Seems backwards to me. But hey, that was what it was like to be a baby millennial. So anyways, I'm kind of going on to a tangent about the crying out method. I'm just really passionate about it because I just feel like it fucked me up. But anyways, so the last hour or so, we've talked about so much with addiction. What the last thing I want to touch on for the episode is how do we move forward in life knowing about this addiction stuff? What do we do now with all of this information? There's so much power in just acknowledging what you've acknowledged today. And this is why I believe FCT is so powerful, because through this healing modality, we are acknowledging and confronting the one thing a lot of people in our family don't want to look at or talk about because of its complexity. In FCT, I'm not making you go back in the family system and relive it. But what I am asking us to do together is acknowledge what happened and take a step past it, to give all of that stuff back to its rightful owner and not you being the one carrying it forward. And so in that journey of healing addiction in any form in your life, you're going to need support, learning how to reparent yourself, reparent your inner child, to learn how to have strong, healthy boundaries and bring more awareness to your triggers. Like, what is triggering them and why? Have you gone back into your life and really looked at where that trigger comes from? And it's going to be painful at times, but I promise you, with the right support system, you can absolutely do it and you can feel empowered doing it too. Especially with somatic work, okay? So if you're healing from the effects of addiction in your family, please go get somatic and nervous system support, because we really do keep the score of trauma in our bodies, and our bodies remember. If you're on Instagram, search Liz Tenuto, the workout witch. I will also link her in the show notes so that you have it. I did her 30-day nervous system support course. It literally takes between 2 and 12 minutes a day, and it totally changed my relationship with my nervous system. There's also different kinds of breathing that you can do. There's music you can listen to. And recently I just heard that if you literally YouTube birds chirping in nature, it helps you soothe your nervous system. It's not going to heal your addiction, but it'll help you get on the path towards it. If you have a parent or a family member in active addiction, I'm here to help you acknowledge that you can't expect anything from them while they are in it. Okay, so my job as a facilitator in FCT is to bring the unseen into the scene, to make the unconscious conscious, to help you move forward from there in layers. And at the end of the day, we can only move as fast as your slowest part. We have to move really slow. Our relationships with our mothers are so vulnerable, and especially in addiction, it's not easy. That's why I said at the beginning of this episode, it's complex. This is just information. What you do with this information is how you're meant to heal the addiction journey that you're on. There are so many tools that you can utilize while navigating addiction if you yourself are going through it. And some of my favorites are EMDR, join a support group, you guys, AA, NA, OA, whatever it is, whatever anonymous group you join. There are so many in-person groups in every city, or you can join online or phone groups. I used to go to CODA, which is Codependence Anonymous, online and phone groups. I'm going to list some below in the show notes for you so that you have that support. But really having community when healing this stuff deeply is such a powerful tool because you'll be able to mingle and connect with people who understand you and what you're navigating. There's a lot of studies coming out right now with ketamine assisted therapy and how that's helping people with major trauma and addiction as well. Somatic therapy, once again, help the nervous system with self-soothing and feeling safe in the body. And lastly, family constellation therapy. I have helped individuals who were in active addiction with FCT. And while I'm still mixed on, being in active addiction, I don't always know active addiction is the best time to come to FCT. It's the most vulnerable time. I think there's other ways that you can get support while you're in active addiction. But I think post active addiction, if you're in sobriety and you're in recovery, I think FCT could be really, really beneficial to look at how it's affected you from the family system. I just think that, and I've learned that clients who come to me in active addiction or they're hiding their active addiction and they're telling everyone that they're sober, it's way too confronting for people and it's just too triggering. They need to be in a more consistent and healthy place with it all. The hard part about people with addiction is that they've gotten so used to numbing and escaping and self-soothing through active addiction behaviors and substances that when they get sober, the real world, their feelings and facing the truth about themselves is super difficult. It's like they've been numbing for so long that when they start feeling emotions, it's like they're feeling 1,000,000 out of 10 intensity. It's not like how somebody can just experience happiness or sadness. It's like now that they're actually feeling their feelings and facing things, it's really, really intense. It's not easy to look at the wounded or shadowed parts of us, let alone do it alone. So that's why I say find your community, find your people. Addiction doesn't just affect the person going through it. It affects the whole family system. It affects everybody individually in a different way. Some people grieve and cry and feel sadness. Some people get angry and frustrated and push the person who's going through addiction away because it's too painful to look at or too frustrating or they feel fed up with them. And some people pretend it's literally not happening and that it's not there. Denial is the greatest protection mechanism for the brain. But it's important to realize that watching someone go through addiction can bring up so many different emotions for us. And so while there's no right or wrong way to feel about someone with addiction, there is a way to handle it and navigate it. And there are many times where watching them go through it is too hard and we may need some space. And part of that is realizing that we have to allow that person in active addiction to make their own choices, especially if they're an adult, because I can tell you firsthand that you can say all the right things and you can give all the research and the data to show how damaging things are. And you can try your freaking damnedest to want to fix them. But the truth of the matter is that you will drain yourself trying to help someone who doesn't want to be helped. Sometimes it's not the addiction itself and the way that it plays out that's hard to watch. It's the confronting way that we are watching someone we love suffer so deeply that is the way that they feel they can get what they need. We have to trust that we are planting seeds. Please trust the power in planting seeds when we try to help. And then that one day they will have enough seeds to sow a fruitful and loving garden for themselves that will maybe finally accept help. Or maybe they don't. And many times with addiction, you will hear that people have to cut off the abuser and go no contact. And I personally have never been someone in that situation that felt like that was the right thing to do. And I'm not going to invalidate that someone felt that that was the right thing to do. That is someone's pure choice of whatever their boundaries are. I believe in boundaries and I'm a huge supporter of needing boundaries with people. So I understand that there are some situations in which having no contact boundaries are the best thing for that person watching the addiction play out and happen, especially in romantic relationships. Like I said, you can't always help someone who doesn't want to be helped. But what I do know is that people in addiction are lacking love, validation, emotional connection, support, and nourishment. And I do know that people in addiction are always faced with the opportunity to get sober. And if they were to choose that, they will need community, love, support, validation, emotional connection, and nourishment. That's the hard part about the human experience. We have such deep free will and choice. We can always, in any moment, choose one path or another. And to watch someone choose harm over health is so tragic. And it's so difficult because we just want the best for that person. My sincere prayer for all people who are watching someone they love go through active addiction is that they can hold the vision of healing, sobriety, love, and peace for their loved one. I seriously hold that prayer all the time, that the person in my life struggling with addiction can find sobriety long enough to see all the beautiful things that life has in store for them, that I see for them too. And I'm holding the vision for them. So that is my role in supporting the person with active addiction in my life. I'm going to keep holding the loving vision for them. And you can do that for them, even if they've crossed over due to addiction, whether they're still living, whatever state of being that they are in, send them that energy of love and peace and hold the vision for them that it's possible. Remember how earlier in the episode we talked about how mothers create safety and nurturing in their children by allowing them to go off into the world and be who they want to be. And if they ever need to take a rest and fall back, that they will always be there for them. Addiction is very, very deeply tied to that. So if you're the person that they can fall back on when they're ready to receive that help, you will give them a gift unlike anything even their own mother has not been able to give them. Sometimes we find healing in the relationships that are unexpected. Sometimes it doesn't come from the person that hurt us the most. In fact, most of the time, the healing that we get doesn't come from the person that hurt us the most. It comes from this random angel or this random magical human being that shows up in our lives and reminds us that we might be okay in our pain and in our suffering. So there's hope and there's possibility. My friends, I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode around addiction. I know it's a sensitive topic. I even felt really emotional speaking on it, but it's so important to spread information about addiction because it affects all of us in a different way. I have so many resources linked below. If something resonated with you today, please look into them and reach out. If Family Constellation Therapy seems like something you could benefit from, DM me on Instagram or comment on TikTok. Leave a comment below if you're on YouTube and let's connect. I would really love to support you or your family member or whatever is happening around addiction in your family system. And yeah, that's it. That's all I got. That's all I wrote. So I will see you next week on my new podcast episode coming out on Tuesday. I drop a new episode every single Tuesday. And don't forget, at the end of June, every single month I do this, but at the end of June, I am announcing a winner for a free family constellation therapy session with me one-on-one for 2 hours. Usually I charge $300 for a 2-hour session. That's the only type of session I offer. And I'm giving one away to somebody who rates, subscribes, or reviews and comments on the podcast, screenshots it to me, sends it to me on Instagram in a DM so that I can know where to find you if you win. It's a phenomenal opportunity for transformation and healing. And I welcome you, if you feel called to it, to enter yourself in to win. All right, guys, see you next week.